It started with a $300 copay, and it ended with my stepfather losing his house, his job, and his freedom. If you want to know how a man who tried to save a few pennies on my life support ended up paying for a brand new Tesla and a criminal defense attorney, stay with me until the end. I'm standing on the porch, wrapping my cardigan tighter around my shoulders because the morning air is biting. And honestly, it's a beautiful morning. The birds are doing their thing, the sun is hitting the dew on the grass, and right there in the driveway, the red and blue lights of the police cruisers are reflecting off the chrome of a brand new Model Y. Gary is screaming. I mean, he is absolutely losing his mind. He's got one officer holding his left arm and another trying to duck his head into the back of the squad car. Nicken and Gary is just purple in the face, veins popping out of his neck, yelling about fraud and ungrateful children. He looks at me, eyes wide, terrified, furious, and I just take a sip of my coffee. My blood sugar is a perfect 100 milligrams per deciliter. Stable, controlled. Unlike him. Basically, he wanted to play accountant with my organs, so I decided to audit his entire life. You have to understand something about me before we get into the mess. My name is Maya, I'm 22, and I am a cyborg. Well, technically, I'm a type 1 diabetic, but when you have a continuous glucose monitor attached to your arm and an insulin pump wired into your stomach 24/7, you feel like a machine. People think diabetes is just don't eat sugar. Let's just say, I wish it was that simple. My pancreas is dead. It resigned. Without external insulin, my blood turns into acid, my organs shut down, and I die. It's not a lifestyle choice. It's a hostage situation, and the pharmaceutical companies are holding the gun. And for the last 3 years, the man negotiating the ransom was Gary. Gary married my mom when I was 19. And here's the thing about Gary. He was what you call performatively wealthy. You know the type? He leased a BMW he couldn't really afford to drive to a job that didn't really pay enough, just to impress neighbors he didn't really like. He was obsessed with optics. To the outside world, he was the generous provider who took in a widow and her sick daughter. But inside the house, he was a financial tyrant. He tracked every kilowatt of electricity. He measured the milk level in the jug. And he absolutely resented my medical bills. I mean, the man would come home with a new set of golf clubs, Titleist, top of the line, probably $2,000, and then sit at the kitchen table and groan audibly when he saw the receipt for my insulin vials. He'd look at me over his reading glasses, this look of pure annoyance, like I was buying designer handbags instead of, staying alive. He used to say things like, "Do you really need the name brand stuff? Isn't there a generic? Or maybe if you just exercised more, you could wean yourself off it." I tried to explain to him, calmly, repeatedly, that type 1 isn't type 2. No amount of kale smoothies or treadmill running brings beta cells back from the dead. But Gary didn't listen to science. He listened to his bank account. And then there was Chloe. Chloe is his biological daughter, my stepsister. She's 16, a dancer, and the golden child. And look, I don't blame Chloe. She's a kid. But the disparity, it was suffocating. If Chloe needed a $200 tutu for a recital, Gary pulled out the credit card with a flourish. "Invest in your passion, sweetheart." But if I needed new sensors for my pump because the old one fell off in the shower, it was a lecture on responsibility. He would sigh, rub his temples, and tell me that money doesn't grow on trees, and that I was bleeding him dry. Have you ever felt like a burden just for existing? Like your basic survival was an inconvenience to the people who were supposed to care for you? Because that's what it felt like every single day. And the ghost of the family I used to have haunted me. Before Mom met Gary, we were broke, sure. But we were a team. I remember Mom working double shifts at the diner just to make sure I had my supplies. She used to hold my hand when I had to change my infusion sites, telling me I was the bravest girl she knew. But Gary had slowly worn her down. He was the financial head of household, and she was terrified of rocking the boat. She'd look at me with these apologetic eyes when he went on his rants, mouthing, "I'm sorry," while he lectured me about the price of test strips. She had become a ghost in her own house, fading into the wallpaper to avoid his temper. So, I learned to make myself small. I hoarded supplies. I wore my sensors 3 days longer than recommended, tapping them down with duct tape when the adhesive failed, just to avoid asking him to order more. I was living in a constant state of low-level anxiety, checking my supply drawer like a doomsday prepper. And honestly, the physical toll was getting to me. My hair was thinning. Stress does that to your numbers. I wasn't sleeping because I was terrified that if I had a low blood sugar episode in the night, I wouldn't have the juice boxes to treat it because Gary had stopped buying unnecessary snacks. But the breaking point wasn't the daily nagging. It wasn't the comments about how expensive I was. It was the summer before my final semester of college. The insurance policy was under Gary's employer. I was still a dependent. And that meant he controlled the portal. He controlled the ordering. I had come into the kitchen one Tuesday morning, feeling that familiar, sticky sluggishness of high blood sugar. My pump was beeping. Low reservoir. I had about 10 units left. Maybe a day's worth if I didn't eat anything substantial. I asked him, politely, if the shipment was coming. And so Gary doesn't even look up from his iPad. He's drinking his espresso from that $3,000 machine he just had to have, and he waves a hand at me dismissively. He basically tells me not to worry about it, that he handled it, and it'll be here by Friday. He's smiling this tight, fake smile, the one he uses when he's lying. I wanted to believe him. I really did. Because the alternative was thinking that the man responsible for my health was lying to my face. But Friday came, and the package didn't. And that's when the dominoes started to fall. Saturday morning arrived, and the silence in the house was deafening. My pump had been beeping intermittently through the night, that high-pitched, insistent chirp that warns you the reservoir is running on fumes. I woke up with a headache that felt like a belt was being tightened around my temples. My mouth was dry, like I had been chewing on cotton balls. I checked the tracking number Gary had texted me 3 days prior. Label created, pending acceptance. It hadn't even left the warehouse, and so I walked into the kitchen. Gary was there, of course, making his weekend omelet with the imported Gruyere cheese he kept hidden in the back of the fridge. The smell of the eggs made my stomach turn, which was a bad sign. Nausea is the first rider of the apocalypse when you're diabetic. I tried to keep my voice steady, but honestly, I was terrified. I showed him the phone screen. I told him the package hadn't moved. I explained that I had maybe 4 units of insulin left in the tubing, which, for a diabetic, is like trying to drive a car across the country on the fumes left in the gas cap. You have to understand, I gave him an out. I really did. I asked him if maybe there was a mistake with the insurance. I asked if we could just go to the 24-hour pharmacy down the street and buy a vial over the counter. It would cost about $300 out of pocket without the prior authorization, but I had $0 to my name because I was a full-time student and he managed the household finances. And here's the thing. Gary didn't panic. He didn't jump up and grab his car keys. He just sighed. He actually rolled his eyes, put his spatula down, and looked at me with this profound disappointment. He basically told me that I was being hysterical. He insisted that he had spoken to the insurance company personally and that it was a supply chain issue that was out of his hands. Then he pivoted. He started lecturing me about my management. He claimed that if I had just eaten fewer carbs earlier in the week, I wouldn't be in this situation. He implied that I was using insulin as a crutch for poor self-control. It was this pseudo-medical gaslighting that he loved to do. He said we couldn't just throw money away at the pharmacy every time I got anxious, especially. And this is the part that stuck with me. especially since he had just paid the deposit for Chloe's ballet intensive. He looked me dead in the eye and said the money was tight this month, and I needed to tighten my belt and wait until Monday. Have you ever looked at someone you rely on and realized that your life matters less to them than their bank balance? Because standing there, watching him sprinkle chives onto his eggs while my blood began to turn into poison, I realized I was entirely alone. I went back to my room. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy to argue. My body was already shifting into survival mode. I drank water. I drank so much water. But the thirst in DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis, isn't normal thirst. It's primal. It feels like your cells are screaming. You drink a liter, and 10 seconds later, your mouth is like sandpaper again, because your body is desperately trying to flush the sugar out through your kidneys. Saturday night is a blur of bathroom trips and shallow breathing. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. My heart was racing. Tachycardia is part of the package, and I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a shipping update, but there was nothing. Just that label-created status mocking me. By Sunday morning, I couldn't walk. I mean, literally. My legs felt like lead. I tried to stand up to go to the bathroom, and my vision just grayed out. I crawled. I remember crawling across the carpet, the fibers scratching my palms, thinking that this was ridiculous. This was the 21st century. I lived in a suburb. There was a pharmacy 2 miles away. And I was dying on the floor because a man didn't want to spend $300. I could hear them downstairs. That was the surreal part. I could hear the TV. Gary was watching a tournament. I could hear the polite applause of the golf crowd. But I could hear Chloe laughing at something on TikTok. The smell of Sunday roast was wafting up the vents, and the scent of the meat made me retch violently into the trash can by my bed. My breath smelled fruity, like rotten apples and nail polish remover. That's the ketones. That's the smell of your body eating itself alive. I tried to call out, but my voice was a croak. I managed to grab my phone. I texted Mom. Help. Sick. That was all I could manage. My fingers were so clumsy, like I was wearing oven mitts. The phone slipped out of my hand and slid under the bed. I remember reaching for it, stretching my arm out and seeing my own hand. It looked pale, the veins dark and blue against the skin. And then, the room just sort of tilted sideways. The gray spots in my vision connected, and the world went black. I don't remember the ambulance. I don't remember Mom finding me. I woke up to the sound of rhythmic beeping. It wasn't my pump. It was a heart monitor. The air was cold, aggressively cold, and it smelled of rubbing alcohol and latex. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of razor blades. That was from the intubation tube they had just taken out. I tried to move my arm, but it was taped down to a board. IV lines were snake charming their way out of both my elbows. A doctor was standing at the foot of the bed. He looked exhausted. He was reading a clipboard and shaking his head. When he saw I was awake, his expression softened, but his eyes remained hard. He didn't do the cheerful, "You're okay," routine. He pulled up a stool and sat down next to me. He basically told me that I was lucky to be alive. He said my pH level was 6.9 when I came in. For reference, anything below 7.0 is usually fatal. He said my potassium had bottomed out and my heart was throwing arrhythmias that should have killed me. He asked me, very seriously, how long it had been since my last dose. I whispered, 2 days. He looked furious. Not at me, but at the situation. He told me that this wasn't just a slip-up. This was near fatal negligence. And then, Mom came in. She looked wrecked. Her eyes were red, her mascara running down her cheeks. She held my hand and cried, telling me how sorry she was, how she should have checked on me sooner. But Gary wasn't there. "Where is he?" I rasped. My voice sounded like a stranger's. Mom looked down at the linoleum floor. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She mumbled that Gary was in the lobby. She said he was dealing with the insurance and that he was very stressed about the hospital bill. She said he was upset that I let it get this bad. That I let it get this bad. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of the last thread of familial obligation severing. I lay there, feeling the cool saline rushing into my veins, keeping me alive, and I realized that Gary wasn't just cheap. He was dangerous. He had gambled my life against the cost of a ballet camp, and he was currently in the lobby worrying about the copay for the ICU. I didn't want to hate him. Honestly, I just wanted to have a dad. I wanted to be safe. But lying in that hospital bed, realizing that he would have let me die on the carpet rather than swipe his credit card, I knew I couldn't be the victim anymore. If I went back to that house as the same person, I wouldn't survive the next supply chain issue. I looked at the bedside table. My belongings were in a clear plastic bag. My phone, my wallet, and Gary's iPad. He must have left it when the paramedics came. In the chaos, Mom must have scooped up everything on the nightstand. It was sitting there, right on top of my clothes. The battery light was blinking, but it was on. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The pain in my body was still there, a dull, throbbing ache in every muscle. But my mind was clearing up. The insulin was doing its job. The fog was lifting. I asked the nurse for a charger. She looked at me kindly, probably thinking I wanted to text a friend or play a game. She brought me a white cord. I plugged the iPad in. I watched the Apple logo appear. I knew his passcode. I knew it because he was arrogant and lazy. It was the year he bought his first BMW 1998. I didn't open it immediately. I waited until Mom went to the cafeteria to get coffee. I waited until the nurse changed my IV bag and left the room. Then, with shaking fingers, not from low sugar this time, but from pure adrenaline, I swiped up. I wasn't looking for an apology. I wasn't looking for a text to his buddies. I was looking for the truth. I needed to know if it really was a shipping delay. I needed to know if the universe was cruel or if Gary was. I opened the email app. I tapped on the search bar. I typed pharmacy. And that's when I found it. When the receipt that would burn his entire life to the ground. The iPad felt heavy in my hands. I mean, physically heavy. Like I was holding a slab of lead, but also metaphorically heavy. Like I was holding a grenade with the pin half pulled. The screen brightness was turned all the way up. Gary's eyesight was going, another thing he refused to admit. And the glare stung my eyes. I could hear the nurses talking out in the hallway, their voices muffled and distant. The rhythm of the heart monitor next to me was the only thing keeping me grounded. Beep, beep, beep. It was a countdown. I knew I had maybe 20 minutes before Mom came back with her coffee, or before Gary decided to grace me with his presence to complain about the parking fees. I tapped the mail icon. My thumb hovered over the screen. My heart rate spiked. I saw the number on the monitor jump from 78 to 105. I took a breath, and I told myself to focus. I wasn't a daughter snooping. I was a forensic accountant investigating a crime scene. I typed pharmacy into the search bar. The little wheel spun for a second. And here's the thing about digital footprints. They don't lie. People lie. Gary lies. But the server logs at CareRx Specialty Pharmacy? They are brutally honest. The first email that popped up was dated last Tuesday. That was the day I asked him about the shipment. That was the day he told me it was on the way. I clicked it. The subject line didn't say shipped. It didn't say delayed. It read, CareRx alert, subscription update, action required. I opened the thread. I scrolled down. And there it was. The smoking gun. It wasn't a generic notification, it was a confirmation of a manual change. I read it 3 times. Just to make sure the hypoglycemia wasn't making me hallucinate, it read, "Dear account holder, per your request on August 12th at 9:45 a.m. via online portal, the recurring auto shipment for Humalog, Insulin Lispro, has been paused. No charge has been applied to your card ending in -4092. Your next scheduled delivery is pending reactivation." I stared at the screen. Per your request. He hadn't forgotten. He hadn't messed up the paperwork. He had logged in, navigated to the specific prescription that keeps me alive, and clicked pause. Basically, he had unplugged my life support to save the $300 copay. But why? That was the part I couldn't wrap my head around. Gary was cheap, sure. He was a miser. But this was reckless even for him. $300 was a lot, but it wasn't kill your stepdaughter money. Unless he needed that liquidity for something else. Unless that $300 was the difference between clearing a transaction and getting declined. I went back to the inbox. I looked at the emails from the same day. Tuesday, the day of the cancellation. I scrolled past the junk mail, LinkedIn notifications, golf newsletters, spam. And then I saw it. An email from the Elite Dance Conservatory. Now, you have to understand, this isn't the local YMCA dance class. This is the kind of place that churns out Broadway dancers and charges Ivy League tuition prices. Chloe had been begging to go to their national intensive for months. Gary had said no. He said it was too expensive. I opened the email. The timestamp was 10:15 a.m., exactly 30 minutes after he canceled my insulin. It read, "Payment successful. Welcome to the team. Ish Chloe. Transaction ID, number 99,281, amount charged, $2,850. Item, gold tier intensive plus costume fee plus housing. Payment method, Visa ending in -4092. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands went ice cold. Not the I'm chilly kind of cold, but the shock response cold, where your body pulls blood away from your extremities to protect your vital organs. He didn't just save money, he traded. He swapped my insulin for a dance camp. He looked at the bank account, saw he didn't have enough float for both, and he made a choice. He chose the tutu over the pancreas. I sat there, frozen. The ringing in my ears was so loud it drowned out the hum of the AC. It was a high-pitched whine, like a dog whistle. I didn't cry. I think that's important to mention. I didn't shed a single tear. Sadness is for when someone makes a mistake. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculation. And honestly, the sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He thought he could just get away with it. He thought he could tell me it was a supply chain issue, let me suffer for a week, and then restart the prescription next month once his paycheck cleared. He gambled that my body would hold out. He bet on my resilience. He lost. But he hadn't just lost the bet. He had left the vault door open. Because as I was staring at that receipt, I realized something. I was on his iPad. I was logged into his email. And if I was logged into his email, I was likely logged into everything. I minimized the mail app. I looked at his home screen. There it was. The folder labeled Finance. I tapped it. My finger hovered over the banking app. Face ID was required. Damn, I couldn't get in there. But then I saw the Amazon app and the Tesla app. You see? Gary had been obsessively building a dream car configuration on the Tesla site for 6 months, and he talked about it constantly. The Model Y performance, red multi-coat paint, the white interior. He would build it, save it, and sigh. I opened the browser. I went to the bookmarks. Tesla, Design Studio. I clicked it. His account was auto-logged in. Welcome back, Gary. I went to the payment methods section of the profile, and there it was, the holy grail. Visa signature, ending in 4092, EXP September 28th. Billing address, same as shipping. He had saved the card he used for the dance camp. The card he protected so fiercely that he almost killed me for it. It was right there, sitting in the autofill data, waiting to be used. And then I remembered something else, something small, but crucial. Years ago, when I first went to college, Gary had added me as an authorized user on this specific credit card account to build my credit score. He never gave me the physical card. He cut it up in front of me and said, "This is for your score, not your spending." But technically, legally, my name was on the account. I wasn't just a thief finding a wallet. I was a co-signer walking into the vault. A nurse walked in to check my vitals. I quickly locked the iPad and shoved it under my pillow. She smiled at me. "Heart rate is a little high, honey. You feeling okay?" I looked at her. I probably looked like a ghost. My skin was pale, my lips were dry, and I had tubes coming out of my arms. But for the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel weak. I felt powerful. "I'm fine," I told her, and I meant it. "I'm actually feeling much better. And I think the fog is finally clearing." She nodded and left. I pulled the iPad back out. I looked at the Design Your Model Y page. I looked at the Order Now button. Gary wanted a luxury car. He wanted to look rich. He wanted to spend money he didn't have while I gasped for air on the carpet. Let's just say I was about to give him exactly what he wanted. I didn't pull the trigger immediately. That's the mistake amateurs make. They get angry, they smash a button, and they get caught. I needed this to be airtight. I needed this to be irreversible. I lay back against the hospital pillows, the iPad resting on my chest, and I started to formulate the plan. The anger that had been boiling in my gut was cooling into something hard and sharp. It was a shift. I wasn't Maya the victim anymore. I was Maya the auditor. And I was about to close the books on Gary's mismanagement. The first thing I did was check the credit limit. I couldn't see the bank balance directly without Face ID, but I could infer it. I went to the credit card portal through the browser. Luckily, he used the same password for everything. Golf 2020. I guessed golf and the year he bought his clubs. I got it on the second try. I logged in. Available credit, $42,000. He had a high limit because he never carried a balance. He was proud of that. Debt is for suckers, he always said. $42,000. That was the budget for my revenge. I navigated back to the Tesla site. I selected the Model Y Performance. $54,000 base. I added the full self-driving capability. $12,000. I added the red paint. $2,000. I added the 21-inch Uber turbine wheels. The due today payment was just the order fee and the down payment. But here's the beautiful part about Tesla. You can configure the financing in the app. I set the down payment. I didn't want to just buy the car. I wanted to drain the card. I set the down payment to exactly $41,500. That left $500 on the card. Just enough for the Uber home and one other thing. I opened a new tab. I searched for concierge medical services. I found a premium, private doctor service in our city, the kind that comes to your house, does blood work in your living room, and costs a fortune. Gold membership, $5,000 annual fee. They allowed payment plans but required a non-refundable initiation deposit, $450. I added it to the cart. So here was the board, the car, a massive, non-refundable order fee, and a pending down payment that would max out the card the second it processed. The doctor. A luxury I actually needed. Paid for by the man who denied me basics. The trap. If he disputed these charges, he would have to explain why an authorized user, me, made them. and that conversation would lead directly to why I made them. But I couldn't do it from the hospital IP address. That was too easy to trace. I needed to do it from home. From his Wi-Fi. From the device that was usually in his office. I waited. The next day, Monday, I was discharged. Gary picked me up. He was acting the part of the concerned dad perfectly for the nurses. He held my elbow as I got into the car. He asked if I had my little kit. "Got everything, sweetie?" he asked, patting my shoulder. I looked at him. He was wearing his polo shirt, sunglasses on his head. He looked relieved. Not that I was alive, but that the drama was over. "Yeah, Gary," I said, my voice flat. "I got everything." The car ride home was silent. He tried to turn on the radio, some talk show about the stock market. I stared out the window. Every time I looked at him, I didn't see my stepfather. I saw a man who had clicked pause on my breathing. When we got home, the house was exactly as I left it. And the carpet where I had crawled was still ruffled. My empty juice box was still on the nightstand. Gary went straight to his office. "Got some calls to catch up on," he said. "Take it easy, Maya." I went to my room. I closed the door. I didn't unpack. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened. I heard him start a conference call. He was laughing. Yeah, family emergency, all good now. Back in the saddle." I pulled out my phone. I had synced his passwords to my iCloud keychain while I had the iPad. I waited until 2 a.m. The house was silent. The only sound was the refrigerator humming. I crept downstairs. Not because I had to, I could have done it from my bed, but because I wanted to stand in the center of his kingdom when I destroyed it. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he lectured me about the price of insulin. I opened the Tesla tab on my phone. Confirm order. Click. Processing. Success. Your Model Y is on the way. I opened the Concierge Medical tab. Pay now. Click. Processing. Welcome to the Gold member family. My phone buzzed with the bank alerts. Alert. Large transaction detected. $41,500. If this was you, reply yes. Alert. Transaction detected. $450. I had his phone number linked to my messages, another little trick from the iPad session. I typed, "Yes. Thank you. Transaction confirmed." I sat there in the dark. When the balance on his prized Visa signature card was now $50, the available credit was 0. But I wasn't done. Financial ruin was good. But for what he did, I needed legal ruin. I opened the browser one last time. I went to the state's Adult Protective Services website. I clicked Report Abuse or Neglect. I selected Medical Neglect. I selected Financial Exploitation. In the description box, I didn't write a sob story. I wrote a report. Guardian canceled life-sustaining medication, insulin, to divert funds for personal luxury expenses, resulting in hospitalization for DKA. Evidence attached. I uploaded the screenshots, the canceled email, the dance camp receipt. The hospital admission discharge papers stating DKA due to missed doses. I hit submit. I watched the little progress bar fill up. Green. 100%. Report received. I put the phone down. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart rate was steady. I went back upstairs, crawled into bed, and for the first time in a week, I slept like a baby. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the sun to rise. Tuesday morning broke with a deceptive calm. The sun was shining. The birds were chirping. It was the kind of morning you see in detergent commercials. But inside the house, the air felt pressurized, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. Gary was in a fantastic mood. That was the hardest part to watch. He was whistling as he made his coffee, talking to himself about the great interest rate he was going to lock in for the Tesla loan later that week. He had no idea that the car was already bought, paid for, and currently draining his credit utilization to 100%. He had no idea that his financial credit score had just taken a nosedive off a cliff. He looked at me as I walked into the kitchen. I was wearing my pajamas, clutching my newly refilled insulin pen like a talisman. And so, Gary flashes this salesman smile and basically tells me that I'm looking much better, implying that a little rest and fluids were all I really needed. He completely dismissed the fact that I had spent 3 days in the ICU hooked up to machines. I stood there, leaning against the counter, and I gave him one last chance. I asked him, very calmly, if he had canceled the prescription on purpose. And here's the thing. He didn't flinch. He didn't look guilty. He just stirred his espresso and lied to my face. He insisted that it was a system glitch that had sorted itself out. He actually scolded me for being paranoid, telling me that I was always looking for a villain and that it was unattractive. Unattractive. He was critiquing my personality while I was recovering from near death. Then he pivoted to his favorite subject, himself. He started bragging that the dealership might have a Model Y available sooner than expected, and he was planning to go down there this afternoon to finalize the paperwork. He was practically giddy about it. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just nodded and let him believe he was still the king of the castle. The tension in the room was palpable, at least for me. Every time his phone pinged, I flinched, waiting for the bank alert. But he had his notifications silenced during his morning focus time. He was blissfully ignorant. Around 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Gary frowned, muttering about how he wasn't expecting anyone. He walked to the door and I followed, staying back in the hallway shadows where he couldn't see me. He opened the door. Standing there wasn't a delivery driver. It wasn't a neighbor. It was 2 police officers and a woman wearing a lanyard that identified her as a caseworker for Adult Protective Services. And so, Gary goes into full charm mode. He asks if he can help them, using that smooth, professional voice he uses on clients. The officer in front didn't smile back. He asked if Gary was the homeowner. Gary confirmed it, his voice tightening just a fraction, asking if there was a problem. The caseworker stepped forward and explained that they were there to conduct a welfare check on me, citing a report of severe medical neglect and financial exploitation. Gary laughed. It was this nervous, high-pitched sound. He basically told them it was ridiculous, claiming that I was fine, that we had just had breakfast, and that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. And he shouted for me to come out and tell these people I was fine. I stepped out of the shadows. I walked to the door. I didn't look at Gary. I looked straight at the caseworker. I told her clearly that I was the one who called. Gary froze. He looked at me like I had just grown a second head. He started stammering, demanding to know what I was doing, urging me to tell them it was a mistake. I told him it wasn't a mistake. I explained to the officers that he had canceled my insulin to pay for a dance camp, and that I had the emails, the bank records, and the hospital discharge papers to prove it. Gary's face went from confused to purple. He started shouting that I was ungrateful, stepping toward me with this menacing look in his eyes. The officer immediately stepped between us, ordering Gary to step back. Gary started screaming that it was his house and that I was lying, claiming that I was mentally unstable because my blood sugar was off. He was trying to use my disease to discredit me in real time. But the caseworker interrupted him. She stated calmly that they had the documentation, and more importantly, they had a flag from the bank regarding suspicious activity on his accounts. Gary blinked. He stopped screaming. He asked what activity she was talking about. The officer glanced at his notepad and mentioned the purchase of a Tesla Model Y and a substantial transfer to a private medical group. He explained that the bank flagged it as potential fraud, but since the purchaser was an authorized user, they had called the authorities to clarify the domestic situation. Gary went pale. All the blood just drained out of his face. He patted his pocket, fumbling for his phone. He pulled it out and swiped the screen. He saw the alerts. I watched his face as he read them. I watched his eyes widen as he processed the numbers. $41,000. Bam, he looked up at me. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was pure, unadulterated panic. He whispered my name, asking what I had done. I told him that I bought the car he wanted so badly. I told him I made sure he got it, and that I had also paid for a new doctor since he clearly couldn't be trusted to manage my health. He started screaming that I had stolen his money. He lunged forward again, shouting that he was going to kill me. The officers were on him in a second. They spun him around and slammed him against the wall. Gary was shrieking about how it was his credit card and that I was the thief. The officer clicked the handcuffs on and informed him that he was being arrested for endangerment of a dependent and that the district attorney would sort out the financial mess. Have you ever watched a bully realize that their victim has teeth? Because let me tell you, the sound of Gary realizing that his glitch excuse wasn't going to work on a badge, it was the sweetest sound I have ever heard. The neighbors were coming out now. Mrs. Higgins from next door was watching from her porch. The mailman had stopped his truck. Gary, the man who cared more about his image than anything else, was being marched down his own driveway in cuffs, screaming about ballet camps and insulin prices. He looked back at me one last time before they shoved him into the car, yelling that he had taken me in and paid for everything. I stood in the doorway. I didn't shout back. I didn't need to. I just held up my insulin pen, tipped it slightly in his direction, and watched the squad car pull away. But the chaos wasn't over. Because as the police car turned the corner, a flatbed tow truck pulled up. The driver hopped out with a clipboard, looking for Gary. He asked if this was the delivery address for the rush order on the Model Y. I couldn't help it. I started laughing. A real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from my chest. I told the driver that Gary wasn't home right now, but he could leave the car right there in the driveway. The tow truck driver didn't ask questions. He was used to delivering toys to rich guys who weren't home. He unhooked the chains, lowered the bed, and rolled the Model Y Performance right into the spot where Gary's BMW used to park. It was gleaming. Red multi-coat paint, white interior, 21-inch wheels. It looked like a spaceship landed in our suburban driveway. And honestly, standing there looking at it, I felt this strange, cold satisfaction. It was a $54,000 monument to Gary's arrogance. It was the physical manifestation of the choice he made. He wanted to look rich so badly that he tried to discount bin my survival. Well, now he looked rich. He owned the car. He just wouldn't be around to drive it. But the silence didn't last long. About 10 minutes after the police cruiser turned the corner, my mother's car screeched into the driveway. She must have gotten the call from the neighbors, or maybe Gary used his one phone call to scream at her. She got out of her sedan, and she looked frantic. Her hair was a mess, her purse was sliding off her shoulder, and she was staring at the red Tesla like it was a bomb that had just detonated. Then she looked at me. And here's the thing about enablers. They don't get mad at the abuser for the abuse. They get mad at the victim for exposing it. Mom stormed up the driveway. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what the police said. She started screaming about the car. She wanted to know whose car that was. She wanted to know why the neighbors were texting her that Gary was in handcuffs. She was shaking, her hands flying around, basically demanding that I fix this immediately. I didn't yell back. I just stood there, leaning against the porch railing, feeling the insulin pump humming quietly against my hip. I told her the truth. I explained that Gary bought the car. Technically, she lost it. She started crying, but it wasn't the "my husband is a criminal" kind of crying. It was the "how will we pay for this" kind of crying. She wailed that they were going to lose the house. She said I had ruined everything over a misunderstanding. She actually used that word, misunderstanding. Have you ever realized that some people are more afraid of a scene than they are of a funeral? Because watching my mother sob over a credit card bill while I was still bruising from IV needles, I realized she would have preferred to bury me quietly than to have the neighbors see police cars in the driveway. She tried to guilt me. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong and started pleading. She told me that Gary loved me. She insisted that he was just stressed, that he made a mistake with the insurance portal, and that we were a family. She begged me to call the police station and recant. She wanted me to tell them I was confused, that my blood sugar was low, that I made it all up. I pulled my arm away. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the iPad. I didn't say a word. I just unlocked it and held it up to her face. I showed her the email, the one with the paused status, the one time-stamped Tuesday morning. Mom stopped crying. She squinted at the screen. She read it. I watched her eyes scan the lines. I watched her read the part where he manually selected pause shipment. Then I swiped left. I showed her the dance camp receipt. Time-stamped 30 minutes later. I swiped left again. I showed her the Tesla configuration page where he had saved his credit card. She stared at the iPad. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the red car in the driveway. She looked at the empty spot where Gary usually stood. And then, she did something that broke the last little piece of my heart that still cared. She looked up at me, wiped her face, and basically said that even if he did it, I shouldn't have called the police. She said that families handle things privately. She implied that I was vindictive. She said that I had destroyed Chloe's future because now they couldn't afford the dance camp. Chloe's future. I was standing there with a dead pancreas, and she was worried about a pirouette. That was the moment. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just leaving Gary, I was leaving all of them. I put the iPad back in my pocket. I looked at the house where I had walked on eggshells for 3 years, the house where I had crawled on the carpet begging for water. I walked past her. I walked down the driveway to the red Tesla. The key card was in the glove box. I knew that because I had read the delivery instructions. I opened the door. The new car smell hit me, leather and chemicals. It smelled expensive. Mom screamed at me, asking where I was going. She shouted that I couldn't take the car, that it wasn't mine. I turned around. I looked at her one last time. I didn't see my mother anymore. I saw a stranger who had chosen a comfortable lie over her daughter's life. I looked her dead in the eye and delivered the only words that mattered. The car is in my name, Mom. And so is the lawsuit. I got in. I put the car in drive. And as I pulled out of the driveway, leaving her standing there in the exhaust of her husband's vanity, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I just watched the road ahead. And for the first time in my life, the path was completely clear. The fallout wasn't quick. It was a slow, agonizing bleed, kind of like the disease Gary tried to ignore. I didn't keep the car. Obviously. I'm a college student. I can't afford insurance on a performance vehicle. But I didn't return it immediately either. I drove it straight to the concierge doctor's office, the one I had prepaid for using Gary's card. And let me tell you, the difference between HMO budget care and gold member care is staggering. I walked in, and they didn't ask for a copay. They didn't make me wait in a plastic chair. The doctor sat me down in a leather recliner, gave me a bottle of sparkling water, and spent 2 hours reviewing my pump logs. He wrote a comprehensive medical report detailing the severity of the DKA and the life-threatening negligence of the interruption. That report wasn't just medical advice. It was the final nail in Gary's legal coffin. I parked the Tesla in a paid garage for a week, racking up fees, while the legal gears started to turn. Gary tried to fight back, of course. He hired a lawyer, probably using a different credit card, and tried to press charges against me for grand larceny and credit card fraud. But here's the thing about the authorized user loophole. It's a beautiful, jagged little trap. My public defender explained it to me, and honestly, I could see he was trying not to laugh. He basically said that because Gary had voluntarily added me to the account years ago and never set a spending limit, and because he had never revoked that access, the purchase of the car was technically authorized. It was a civil dispute, not a criminal theft. Gary could sue me in small claims court for the money, but I couldn't be arrested for using a card that had my name on the file. However, the endangerment of a dependent charge? That stuck like glue. The prosecutors had the emails. They had the time-stamped dance camp receipt. They had the doctor's report stating I was hours from death. The narrative was simple. A stepfather drained the family's medical budget to buy luxury items and dance lessons, willfully neglecting a disabled dependent. Gary took a plea deal. He had to. If he went to trial, he would have looked like a monster to a jury. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of reckless endangerment. He got 3 years of probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record. But the real punishment wasn't the law. It was the math. The Tesla eventually got repossessed, but because it was now a used car, the value had tanked. The bank came after Gary for the difference, the deficiency balance. Between the $41,000 hit to his card, the repo fees, the legal fees, and the impound costs, his credit score was incinerated. It dropped into the low 400s. He lost his job too. Turns out, financial firms don't like employing wealth managers who get arrested for fraud-adjacent crimes and have their wages garnished. And Mom? She stayed with him. That was the saddest part, but also the most liberating. They had to downsize. They sold the house, the one with the big driveway, and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. Chloe had to drop out of the elite dance conservatory because the tuition check bounced. I hear from them occasionally. Usually, it's a text from Mom asking if I'm happy now, and honestly, I am. I'm living in a studio apartment near campus. It's small. It smells like old books and coffee. I pay for my own insulin now, thanks to a university grant and a part-time job. It's tight. I don't drive a Tesla. I drive a beat-up Honda Civic. But every morning when I wake up, I check my pump. The screen glows blue in the dark. 100 milligrams per deciliter. Perfect. I think about Gary sometimes. I think about him sitting in that small apartment, checking his bank balance, watching every penny, terrified of the next bill. I think about how he wanted to save $300 and how I made sure that decision cost him his entire kingdom. People say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in my experience, revenge is best served with a stable blood sugar and a zero balance on your credit card.